travelers, and welcome to another episode of First Stars Podcast 5th season. Be sure to like and subscribe. Enjoy this amazing episode because Liam Sharp returns to the mothership to discuss Spawn, the Dark Ages. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Sharp. Thank you for coming back to the First Stars Podcast.
It's very good to be here. Cheers, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. And last time we got to talk, we talked about Starhenge, which was a fantastic creator-owned series. That's fantastic. And we were talking a little bit off air that one day it looks like you will be returning to it, correct?
Well, yes. I mean, that's always the plan. It means too much to me, And every single time I do a con, there's always people that come up and say, "More Starhenge, please." So there's
it,
demand for sure.
it must be a good feeling to have fans clamoring for something that you've done.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this has been the best time for me currently, I think. I feel very privileged. I mean, obviously, next year will be my 40th year in the business, which is crazy.
Nice.
Um, but it definitely feels like the stuff I'm doing is landing and people are enjoying it, and that there's some love out there for the stuff I'm doing. So I'm in a good space. I'm enjoying it, and very very happy.
Well, talk about clamoring. Okay, so you're now writing and providing the artwork for a new series called Spawn Dark Ages. Now, there was a Spawn Dark Ages book that you were doing the art for back in 1999. This is going back. We're closing on 25 years. I think it's over 25 years.
Yeah.
Is this connected to the same character, the same series, or is there something new?
It's really not. The original series was really towards the end of the Dark Ages, and it was much more of a medieval Britain book. This one is. I thought it'd be fun to take it right back to the beginning of the Dark Ages in the 5th century, which is also an area, a point in time that I know a little bit more about, to be fair, because it's something that I studied quite a lot for Starhenge as much as anything else. Um, and it just seemed like a good fit. I like the idea that if this proves popular, that we can take that character through, several centuries of the Dark Ages and jump around a bit and tell a bunch of different stories from the whole sort of thing. But at the moment, he's a bit Clint Eastwood like. He's we don't know much about his background, and he doesn't know anything about his background either. So it's a fun place to start with the story.
Is it the same Spawn though from the 1999 series?
No, it's not. No,
Totally
it's
different
a,
Spawn. Okay. Will it help readers to go back and read the 99 version and connecting to what you're writing right now, or is it that separate?
I think it's that separate. I think it's a really good place for people to just jump in because this one, the 6 issues, is a complete story. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It sets up a new Dark Ages Spawn. Um, but yeah, it's a good place to jump in. If you've never read a Spawn book, you can definitely jump in here and read this, and you wouldn't need to know anything.
So we're basically talking about 25 years since the end of the last time you were hanging out in the Spawn universe from a regular standpoint. What brought you back to Spawn? And Spawn, other things about Spawn too, that Spawn universe with Todd McFarlane has changed a lot in 25 years. The universe has expanded in a massive way. So two questions, I guess it's two questions on that. One, what brought you back? And two, how has it been trying to navigate the new Spawn universe?
Honestly, I mean, Todd in the New York con recently, he sort of was talking to the creators that have been working with him currently. And one of the things he said is like, yeah, we're expanding it, but we're only really doing about 20% of what could be done with this character. It could be massive, but we're doing a small amount. So the parameters are huge. There's room there to really explore pretty much anything you like. And the only real sort of background info was like Gaia is it's more about Gaia and the Earth and all of that. And so I thought, how do you tie this in as a story to something which is really in the 5th century? You're looking at post-Roman Britain. You're looking about at the time when those Arthurian myths were starting to sort of percolate and become something else, to grow and spread. And there's a lot of there's a sort of death of the Celtic mythology around that time. There's a hell of a lot happening in Britain at that time. You've got the Hibernians who will become the Irish invading from the west. You've got Saxons invading from the east. You've got the Picts up in Scotland in the north coming down as well. So there's tension all the way around the islands. And then within the country itself, you've got Christendom, which is formed around Rome, the Christian Rome. So Britain is becoming more Christian, but there's still pagan elements too. And this spawn I've got very much tied to Danu, which was the earth goddess, who's kind of at this point a stand-in for Gaia. Um, and so he sort of represents that Celtic side, and the king, who's Aurelianus, has got to kind of form a truce with him to try and unite the Britons, the pagan and the Christian Britons, in order to fight off all of these threats from all the different corners of the island. So that was the sort of premise that I came up with. And as for doing it, it was really a case of like back then I was offered I thought I was going to do Conan, but it fell through for various reasons at that time. And I suddenly found myself, I was meant to be starting a job. I had 2 weeks left to go before I could start it, and I had no work. And I was in a sort of slight state of panic. And it just dawned on me that maybe it would be worth reaching out to Todd and seeing if he was interested in doing a new Dark Ages series, because obviously Spawn at that point there was an awful lot of books around. There was this was the back end of lockdown, and so the universe had sort of really expanded, and they were doing the gunslinger stuff, all the other Spawn books that they've been doing. And I just thought, well, I'll just find out if someone's doing Dark Ages, and they weren't. So I was just really lucky with the timing, and literally it was astonishing. I sent an email, and I heard back within the hour, and said, let's jump on a call. I was on a call with Todd within about 2 days. And then it was down to me to pitch it, and they've just been really great fun to work with. Thomas there is just a lovely guy, and a really pleasant editor to work with. And there's just a lot of goodwill, I think, and openness to new ideas, and also a lot of trust. I've been really sort of left alone with it, probably because it's just an area that I've become kind of an armchair expert in, really. So it's been good. It's been good.
Now you're going to help me with pronouncing the name. So the Dark Age spawn is Earl King Yulegrave?
Elking Yulegrave, yeah,
Erking Yulegrave.
yeah.
All right, so you're gonna have to probably correct me a few times during the interview to make sure I get the name 100% right. I've never been good at pronouncing anyone's name. Thank God your name is Sharp, so it makes my easier to say your name. But very bad with names, so please correct me as I make mistakes as we go on. As you mentioned before, this is a time between paganism and Christianity, right? Basically, Christianity at this point has only been around for, well, less than 500 years because it came after Jesus Christ supposedly died at 33. So paganism was still the predominant faith in this region of the in the north. Where does Erlkin Yulgrave exist prior to becoming a spawn in this pagan or Christian dogmatic faith system here?
Well, that isn't really, I'm saving that for further down the line. I don't want to give too much away about his origins, but he's really a stand-in for um, the Lord of the Wild Hunt. So that the Wild Hunt is he was a mythical character that would rage through towns during the Halloween period, and you know Samain, and those pagan times, and basically steal families away. And the idea is actually that the pagans have gone to live in Londinium, which has become abandoned and become overgrown with a city of forest, sorry, where the city was. And all of the pagans are sort of under Spawn's protection there, Ilking Yulgrave's protection, and the myth of him being the Lord of the Wild Hunt has kind of grown up, and it's given him, it's one of those nice things. Did it happen? Didn't it happen? It's a little bit of Christian propaganda where they're saying he's a bad guy who does that, but
Yeah.
actually he's not, because he's just protecting his flock, really. Um, so that was all that side of it. And Londinium's really interesting. When I was researching this, I'd written the term dark earth, and it turned out that because of sort of the matter of civilization in that area for a long time, natural breaking down of waste and animal waste and all of that kind of stuff, meant that when it was abandoned, it became extremely fertile, and trees grew to like 3 times their regular height, and a forest grew at an incredible rate over the top of it. So those are kind of the fun things um, that I found out in some of the research for it. In terms of the Christianity side, the that was very much came in from Rome. When Rome turned Christian, because originally the Romans in Britain would have been following the Roman gods at that time, so they converted, and that's the Romans brought Christianity to Britain, and that sort of continued on through, really. Um, so there
Now,
was a it's an interesting time, because obviously the Saxons had their own gods as well, and the Hibernians had their own gods, and the Picts had theirs. And Canunus was one of the lesser known ones. He's really interesting as a god, actually, because there's a lot of depictions of him, and we know what he represented, but there's no stories about him whatsoever. Which means that sort of, as a character, it's wide open to interpretation, and that's why Danunus, his uh, druidess character, she's called. I've taken the name of Danu, the Earth Mother, and Canunus, who's the horned god of death and nature and everything, and sort of put the two together so that she represents life and death. So yeah, it's fun coming up with all that stuff.
well, I mean, the interesting thing is that at this time period, again, 5th century, Rome is obviously, like you said, Christian. It's on the way out, but it's still towards the height of its power.
Yeah.
Christians viewed paganism as satanic to begin with, witches, magic, stuff like that. Having a hellspawn amongst their number must not be helping their reputation. Is that a good thing for the pagans, or a bad thing for pagans that he's hanging around in a time where the Christians would definitely see him as the ultimate evil?
Well, interestingly, again, this is a time where there isn't that necessary version of the devil, the version that we have now. So hellspawn as a concept isn't really a thing at that period. Um, and there was a theory. One of this is something I read about back in my teens. Actually, it was a guy called Nikolai Tolstoy, um, who's the grandson of the more famous Tolstoy, but he was a big student of Arthurian mythology and all of that. And he had the theory that when the Christians were spreading in Britain, they took Canunus, and basically, again, a kind of propaganda said, you guys are worshipping this horned entity, and he's evil. You need to convert to this god, and that may have been an original prototype version of what became the devil. So it is fascinating that this is a point, a sort of melting pot in the country, where these what would become future ideas of what heaven and hell and the devil is like, and it's sort of found is becoming sort of formed, and how these things arise as visual imagery. And so in terms of him being a hellspawn, the person who's calling him that and creating a vision, especially for the king, and trying to sort of, you say you shouldn't be doing this, it is a Kentigern, a priest in this, who's very much anti the idea of, he's much more on the side of the Saxons, and he really wants Aurelianus to side up with the Saxons, and definitely doesn't want Spawn to be involved with Aurelianus at all, the king. So there's this sort of fight going on between the characters about what is right and wrong. and what should and shouldn't be happening in the country. But Aurelianus, being a very much a king and a general, who's a we figure out quite early on he's a student of history, so he's been following Philip of Macedon, which would imply, of course, that he knows Alexander the Great, who's the son of Philip of Macedon, and the idea of the phalanx, which was formed by Philip, was picked up by the Romans, and he's the last of one of the British Roman kings. So he's very much a student of all of that, and he's a general. And he basically he's like, I'm not going to listen to this guy's propaganda because I know that we need this guy if we're going to protect the country.
Hmm.
So whether I like it or not, or whether you like it or not, this is just what I've got to do.
Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting is going back to Erkling Yulgrave, and I'm saying it slowly to make sure I get it right every time.
Yeah,
Erkling Yulgrave. As you said, he's with the pagans, right? But having become a spawn, he obviously went to the realm of Malbolgia. That becomes very clear. He has better knowledge than most that there is obviously a hell and a heaven of some sort because he's there. That is that a crisis of faith for a guy who was a pagan or no?
he doesn't know his background. He's got no memory of
Okay.
his background. So we don't know that yet. This is stuff that will be coming much later on. Assuming that these stories that I get to tell more and more stories down the line, which is certainly the plan at the moment. It'll depend on how much people warm to these books, but I've stayed very light in terms of it's much more suggestive than anything else, and I've tried to tie it into historical precedents of that time rather than anything else. I mean, it's all fantasy. It's not. I'm not trying to do a historical book in any realistic sense. Aurelianus is a name that pops up as a king, but he's a sort of, they don't. There's not much known about him really. It's been suggested that he was the template for King Arthur. He may have been. He might not have been. It's also been suggested that he's the template for Merlin, which I find harder to believe because it doesn't make really much sense. And that's not the case with Geoffrey of Monmouth when you read that stuff. But I think as an Arthurian template, he's pretty solid. In terms of the name Earl King Yulgrave, Yulgrave is a place in Derbyshire, and it always had this evocative kind of. I just always liked the word. It was a great name for a name, and the Earl King is very much tied into the Lord of the Wild Hunt. So he's an earl, he's a king, it's something that suggested that he's from a powerful lineage, so that was the reason behind that. But the keeper of the knowledge of who he is and his background is it's Danunis, the druidess. So she really tends to our Spawn character here and looks after him and takes care of him really.
Now, being the fifth century, this predates Cagliostro, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So,
Cagliostro's not in it for sure.
right.
I don't know where he was in terms of I'm not 100% on the lore of that. There's a lot. There's a lot
Yes.
there. Um,
Um,
I have to check a timeline to see where he comes in. Yeah.
well, okay, so thinking about Yulgrave, you said he has no memory of his time when he became a spawn, but he obviously has to realize he's different. Now, how does he understand what he is? Is because usually when we think about Al Simmons, right? In the original Spawn series of Al Simmons, he had Cagliostro to kind of explain to him a little bit what the hell was going on. There's no one for
Yeah.
that for Yulgrave. He is the only, far as he knows, he's the only of him type of himself that there exists. How does he understand what he is? How does he come to terms with what he may or may not be?
He all he knows is that he is the guardian of what is left of the pagan Brits, really, the Britons in the country, and he's almost a cipher in that sense. He's like a force of nature. Um, his world is slightly chaotic. He's a sad and he's a kind of a lost soul. It's funny. I watched the Frankenstein movie the other day, and I thought, that's almost him. There's something really, especially once he's evolved, into the monster in the second half of the film. It's like, yeah, he's got a real vibe of my Spawn character in this story, and I like that idea. I thought it was fun to have a Spawn character that has no real sense, and his memory fades all the time, and he has to tell himself. He has to hear the myths and the stories about himself and has to be reminded of it to remember who he is and what he's done. Um, and I've sort of written some of the next series as well, and that sort of expands on this, where he's just sort of saying, I need to, I tell myself these stories, and I don't know if I'm repeating reality or whether it's become mythic, or, if I'm getting it right, because they're memories of memories of memories of memories. Um, but I have to tell myself these things in order to have any sense of who I am at all. And part of the quest of this character is to try and find out who he is. Um, but we'll find that out down the line. For the sake of this story, he is just essentially a very powerful leader of the pagan side of the Brits, who has to form an allegiance with the Christian King Aurelianus, and it's really a two-hander. It's at this point the first book is as much about Aurelianus as it is about Elkin Yulgrave.
Now, there's one through line of all spawns. It's tragedy. All
Yeah,
spawns are products of tragedy. Al Simmons with Wanda, Gunslinger, I can't remember his sister, but all things are they're all creatures of tragedy.
yeah,
Do we
yeah.
learn the tragedy of Yilgrave?
Not in this story, but there is definitely tragedy in the story, for sure. It's there's a this is a real. I mean, it's quite Shakespearean, even in the way I've written it, because I've used I've got words like Jew beaters, and there's a glossary for it, pagan words and stuff. Um, uh, and it is quite Shakespearean, but it's also Shakespearean in the sense that it's a big melodrama with betrayals and with love and with questions about one's place in everything. And it is yeah, and also the sort of the loneliness of the Spawn character, and he's betrayed and the king's betrayed, and without giving too much away, it's not an easy union. And it's things start very after the end of the first book. Things get off on a fairly intense footing, but and as you'd expect, for a little while things are pretty good, and then after that, of course, stuff happens. So and there's a little hint of it at the end of the first issue without giving too much away. There's a little hint of like, okay, there's stuff stirring underneath that, and there's people who aren't happy about this union at all. Um, so again, don't want to give too much away there.
You're gonna fix my pronunciation a second. King Aurelianus?
Aurelianus.
Aurelianus. I'm gonna get that wrong multiple times. I do apologize.
It's
Aurelianus. In many ways, you could argue he's the Christian king in the area, um, but he's going to forge alliance with what is being called the Devil Spawn.
yeah.
Um, if you're a religious Christian, I would imagine you view yourself as a soldier of God, whatever, the Christian God. How does it impact the view of himself and his mission if he's siding with what he's calling the Devil Spawn?
Well, again, I don't want to give too much
Okay.
away there because it's all about the future relationship of not necessarily even Spawn, but Danunis. So I'm going to leave that one a little bit up in the air because that features a lot in the story. So a lot of that is his own personal journey about what he
Well,
feels and what he believes.
Well, the other part of that too is that during this time period as well, Christian is on the expanse,
Mhm.
usually not in a friendly way. They're conquerors and taking over land and people and stuff like that. As you mentioned, the Spawn, the Dark Age Spawn is the protector of the pagan, who's left of the pagan world in his area. Why would he want to help future conquerors of his land?
Mainly because he's already on his back foot. He's what we do learn in the story is that at some point he was much more powerful within the country, and he's on his back foot with the last of the pagans who are under his care. And the argument is from Aurelianus is like we may be mortal enemies, but together we can protect the country. I need you and you need me. We can do it together. I can't do it on my own. I'm not quite powerful enough. You are on your back foot. And you may have like you may have terror on your side and you may have, whatever powers he has. Um, but you are still the king of a forest haunting a dead city. You're not. You've been put there by powers. You have been overwhelmed in the past,
Mhm.
and he's offering him a way out. He's offering him uh, an opportunity to be more of a player. I mean, basically, if Spawn doesn't back with him, then he will just continue to be less and less relevant and forgotten, and he will eventually just get driven out there too. So they're stronger together. They both need each other, and that's really the heart of it.
Now, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, uh, Grave is the protagonist of the series, but is he the hero of the series? Like, which character would you call the actual hero if he's the protagonist?
Um, well, again, I really do think that he's like, a Clint Eastwood man with no name character. So he is definitely heroic, despite the fact that there are characters that want to tear him down and want to belittle him and want to make him a monster and present him as a monster. There are other characters who are very much on his side and going, no, that's not what he is at all, and you need to understand that. So there's this conflict again, as you say, just between the historical factions of that time, and again, it's with the Saxons. Kentigern is trying to get the king there to the Saxon king to embrace Christendom as well, from a point of view of that will make him much more powerful. And that's something we learn in later issues. Um, there's a lot of different little elements going on. But the big threat side of it becomes less important ultimately than the tragedy and the betrayals at the heart of the story, which are much more on a small scale. So there's the wider stuff, the wider geopolitical stuff that's happening in the country, and then it all becomes really focused around this love story at the heart of it, and these, like I said, big betrayals that happen that threaten everything.
Now, the only interesting thing about the world of Spawn is that, interestingly enough, even though Spawn, the idea of Spawn is the through line of the entire company. There's many different spawns that you potentially could think of as being similar, but they're not. You have Alcim has a very particular power set. Gunslinger Spawn has the necro bullets that he uses. The Spawn from Rat City is different. They're all different. How do you define the power set of the Dark Age Spawn differently than how the other spawns are using what they've got?
I mean, he's quite. It's really just strength and regenerative abilities. He's pretty damn hard to kill. you know, and he does get weakened at a point in the story, and you're not sure if he's going to come back or not. But it's a yeah, that's it. It's nothing. He hasn't got like a specific weapon or anything at this stage. It's really just he channels the earth energy, the Gaia stuff really. So he is a creature of pagan lore at this point. Whether he finds out that there's more to it than that later on is something, like I say, I want to say for future stories. But from where he stands at this time and in this story, his power is entirely derived from pagan earth energies and is all about invulnerability, strength, just being a hell of a warrior and a great leader. And people trust him, um, and are terrified of him. So some of it's the terror aspect of well as well, because he's like a giant. He's terrifying looking. He does not look like a regular guy. Um, so yeah, and but there's a tragedy again at the heart of him, and I think you sense that all the way through the story.
Mm. And we'll see. For we talk about protagonists, talk about hero, now we're talking about antagonists, right? What do you have in store that can actually challenge a Hellspawn during the Dark Age time period?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's less. Back in the day when I did Dark Ages the first time around, Todd was very much about, I don't want this to be about magic. I don't want it to be about powers and everything. I want it to be about, at the time back then, it was like, I want it to be like, uh, what's it called? The I'm blanking the name of it now, but the Mel Gibson Scottish movie, Braveheart. And Todd loved Braveheart, and he wanted it to be, something like that, and all more about real geopolitics and battles with humans. And I kind of took that as a leap off point for this one too, where it was there isn't like a big monster threat there. The biggest threat, I don't want to say which character, but it is one of the humans, and it's more about his wish for power and his machinations within the sort of courtly system, and what that is and why. And like I say, it's about betrayal. So you're dealing with armies and you're dealing with invaders and armies and warriors and that kind of thing. And that the threats are in that sense less magical and much more like just about, this is the shifting of power from continent to continent. So uh, that will change later on. I'm definitely gonna be bringing in some epic mythic stuff in future stories. But for this one, I just wanted to set it up as a sort of historical melodrama with some supernatural elements.
But I think it's cool, and I also think it's also that you're able to use your research that you've done on Starhenge to apply to the Dark Ages.
Mm.
Um, and it sounds like you're extremely well versed in the time period. What is about the time period that someone who may not be as familiar with it would be interested in knowing about that you've been able to dig up in all the research that you've done?
Well, the thing for me was that when I was at school, I studied classical civilizations, and it really dealt with Greek and Roman classic stuff, drama, history, and mythology. And I got very into the mythology. I kind of always had been, ever since growing up on things like Jason and the Argonauts and those great kind of films, the sword and sandals stuff, which I just adored. And I remember my dad buying me this book when I was a kid called Legends of the Stars, and I just loved that. And there was a point along the way where I thought, you know what, I know more about Greek and Roman gods and myths, and a little bit about the Egyptian ones, but I know nothing about pagan gods and like the stuff that our country was rooted in. And I became sort of really intrigued then about, okay, what about the pagan gods? What is there? What is there to know? And I discovered some great books. There's a couple of books by Jim Fitzpatrick, The Silver Arm, and the Book of Conquests, and they're both about Irish mythology, and that was really interesting. And I found another beautiful book called The Mabinogion, which is all the Welsh myths, and that was illustrated by Alan Lee, who became later on much more famous globally for his design work for Lord of the Rings with Peter Jackson. But he also did an amazing book called Fairies back in the day with Brian Frow that was superb, and that had some of those things in as well, little references to Irish mythology. Um, and also the book that I mentioned earlier, the Tolstoy book, which was called *The Quest for Merlin*, which was fascinating to me, and I read it when I was about 16, I think. Um, And all of these things just led to that. And the more I dug into it, the more I got interested. The Tolstoy book referenced Geoffrey of Monmouth, who I hadn't formally heard of. So then that opened that up, and then I was like, okay, I need to know about Monmouth. Monmouth becomes really fascinating. He's a English monk writing for and he's a real historical figure. He writes this book called, well, a couple of books. One is the Prophecies of Merlin, and the other one is History of the Kings of Britain, which is a very much like Virgil. I don't know if you've come across Virgil's The Aeneid. So the Aeneid is a piece of propaganda, really. It was written for Augustus. I think it was Emperor Augustus. Pretty sure it was. Uh, and it was really a rewrite of the Odyssey, except instead of Odysseus, we have Aeneas. And Aeneas is a demigod, he's a part god, and he goes through a very similar journey to Odysseus, and he founds Rome. And he is the descendant of all the Roman emperors, and therefore the Roman emperors are part god. And that is a big piece of propaganda. What Geoffrey of Monmouth then does, which is pretty much exactly the same, but there's a deep bit of irony in the heart of it, is he then says, right, Aeneas has a son called Brutus. Brutus comes to England, lands at Totnes, puts his foot on the rock, which is still in Totnes. There's still a rock that says this is where Brutus landed. Um, then he founds all the kings of Britain. So basically saying, even though he was a Christian priest himself, is saying, yeah, but you kings of Britain are all related to the Roman gods, which is fantastic. And in that line, the same line, we come eventually to Uther and then to King Arthur. Arthur believes that Rome is his birthright, and this is in this fantastic version of the story, which we don't really hear about that much. And he then sets off to conquer Europe. He conquers Ireland. He conquers even Iceland. He goes up to Iceland, and then he goes out across Europe, conquers all the way across Europe. A lot like Hannibal, he gets to the Alps. He's about to cross the Alps, and there's pretty much no doubt at this point because he's just laid waste to everywhere he's gone. So he's kind of in the League of Alexander, that kind of a figure. Monmouth is really saying, the Brits are astonishing conquerors, and this is a great conquering hero. And he's about to cross the Alps, take over Rome, and become the Roman emperor. When he hears the news that Modred, back in England, has taken over the throne, and therefore he has to go back, and then that becomes sort of the heart of what we know of the later myth that becomes the story that was written by the much later versions of the Arthur Thomas Mallory version, for instance, is much more sort of contained. um, so it's really fascinating, and I loved all of that, and obviously some of that's in the Starhenge story, um, and it's really there's just this incredible wealth of interconnectedness that we don't sort of know enough about. And so I sort of feel it's a little bit of my mission to inform more people about these fantastic bits of lost mythology and history that
That's awesome.
uh,
That's
I
awesome.
love it.
Well, like I said, I always love history, and I love the fact that because you're so well versed in it, you can apply the history to your book and make it feel just that much more real and tangible to a universe that doesn't necessarily have to be tangible. I think it's nice to
Well,
have.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, and thank you for that because that was something that I hoped would have. I hoped that there's enough in there that people might go, oh, that's actually quite interesting. I would quite like to know a little bit about that period, because it sort of seems, it's the Dark Ages, and weirdly, there's a lot of stuff there that people don't sort of put the same kind of effort into knowing. It's not as widely known historically as, say, the Tudors or, later history.
And I think that
Uh,
something else that's kind of interesting is that I mean, obviously, you're a great artist. You've become a great writer, and you're working for Todd McFarlane, who's a great artist, who also became a great writer. Is there a different way that you guys can communicate with each other because you both have a mind of experience of writing, and you can look at things from a visual standpoint as an artist? I mean, is there like a shorthand when you guys communicate with each other about your books?
I actually, I mean, Todd's a very, very busy guy, you know. Um, Most of my communication is through Thomas on the editorial level. I've had very little communication with Todd. I'm, of course, an admirer, and I really appreciate his trust. And of course, you know, if you get a go ahead on one of these books, it's awesome because you know that he's sold and he's interested in the idea. But he's an extraordinarily busy man with a lot of people wanting his attention. So I try to be as low impact as possible to make it life as easy as possible, and just to be sort of a easy to work with and responsive, and you know, bring my A game to the table as well and bring something fresh. And I know that that was something he was keen for, was something like a totally different take or something they haven't got in any of the other books. So I bore that. I really sort of had that in mind, and I thought, what is the best thing I can apply to this book? And it's, well, exactly that. It is the Dark Ages. It fitted perfectly into the time zone that I had at the time period that I had, you know, former interest in and current, you know, long ongoing interest. So I just thought, well, it's perfect for me, really.
Now, now, if I remember correctly, I believe the first issue of Spawn Dark Ages comes out this Wednesday. I'm pretty sure. It's this Wednesday, I believe. So for our listeners, what can we look forward to in the first issue of Spawn Dark Ages? And is this a mini series? Is this going to be an ongoing? Have you already? It sounds like you already have the second series already approved. So can you break this down for us a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, assuming and hoping that you know, people like it and embrace it. Uh, I think the first issue is absolutely some of the best work I've ever done, color wise. Just no, I put a hell of a lot of work into it, um, and I'm very, very proud of it artistically. Um, and obviously, I'm kind of I'm doing everything on this, so that there's a lot of there's a lot of pressure on me for that to make sure it lands and matters. Um, I had a lot of time to do it, so I took that time. I agonized over the script. The amount of times I rewrote the script, I kept updating it and updating it. And even when I was three issues in, I'd be going back to the first one and refining it and cutting it down and making it a little bit more, um, hopefully streamlined, because it's not. I am asking a lot of the readers. It's quite wordy. Um, I wanted it to have that kind of like Henry V type stuff. So when he's talking about he's overlooking that there's a piece and there's a big battle in the first book, and he's facing down the Saxons and he's giving a speech to his men. And I wanted it to have that kind of Henry V, you know, once more into the breach, dear friends, or St. Crispin's Day kind of Shakespearean quality to it. And you can't just do that in a few words. You know, it's going to fill you've got to really put your heart and soul into it. So there is some wordy bits and Shakespearean bits and theatrical bits, and it's a like I say, it's a melodrama. So there are I think some really lovely words in there that are, you know, I love the idea of things like Jew beaters, which turns out to be that's a term for cowards, and it's like it's the sound of feet flapping away across the dewy grass, you know. Um, so those kinds of things, I thought I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm going to try to write a stirring kingly speech, you know. Um, and it's I hope it's got a sort of what I kind of wanted to write it as if it was a real myth. You know, to give it like this is a piece of history that's been handed down, and this is a classical piece of work. It's not just a made up thing. This is something we all know this story, right? This is So I tried to write it like that, as if it was like a classic Arthurian story or a classic thing that we've seen in films or read in books or studied at school, and just to give it some weight and gravitas. And that sort of became my objective, really. But it has, like, for all of that, it's still, we've got a big battle in there. We've got one big splash with a huge stack of bodies and sort of Barry Smith kind of, styly, Frazetta-ish kind of style. There's some of my most detailed stuff in there. There's some kind of stuff that is almost an homage to Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein stuff. As I said before, there is a sort of weirdly Frankenstein-like element, especially to the Spawn character. And there's also, for people who like sword and sorcery, he's definitely got elements of Conan about him, Aurelianus the King, you know. So he's wearing a sort of Roman uh, get up, really kingly get up, warriors get up. But you look at him, you're like, yeah, that could be Conan for sure.
Well, well,
And then, there's the Celtic stuff as well. So
well. I mean, I my copy's reserved at the comic book store, so next week I'll pick up my issue. And like I said, this looks fantastic, Mr. Sharp. I greatly appreciate you coming back on the show, and this sounds awesome. I'm looking forward to getting my comic.
I hope you enjoy it, mate. And do drop me a line. Let me know what you think when you've read it.
Totally will do. Thank you so much, sir.
A pleasure, mate. All the best.